Hello travelers and welcome back. This is going to be the first part of what may become a series that I'm calling the Traveler's Guide to Lindwurm. The idea of the series is to go over some just basic core functions for people getting into the game and some thoughts to people that have been playing the game for a bit. Sometimes, different points of view are always helpful. This first episode will be looking at list building. It was requested by a viewer, Joel Traveler, and it was a great idea. So thank you for that. And it's pretty self-explanatory. I'm just going to walk through some of the thoughts that I have when I'm building lists. And yeah, pretty much that. For new players, this is hopefully going to be helpful. If, sometimes it's daunting of where to actually start. And for players that have been playing for some time, maybe it will just give you a different point of view on how to build lists or different ways of building lists. If you do enjoy this video, or if you're having different thoughts about list building, if you have different courses that you take, I'd love to hear about it in the comment section. If you're enjoying the videos, please like and subscribe to the channel and hit the little bell so you get notified when new videos come out. It's great. It helps let me know people are watching and also help support the channel. If you are so inclined to try and support the channel financially, there are two options. There is a link to a Buy Me a Coffee in the description below. And if you are buying anything from the Corvus Belly store, maybe when you're building lists you realize you're missing something, if you use the affiliate link in the description below, I get a bit of a kickback from Corvus Belly. But the main ways you can help support the channel are those non-monetary ways of liking and subscribing, and of course, commenting, all that, and sharing it with friends. But with that, let's jump into the Traveler's Guide and start looking at list building. So, where to begin but the beginning. So where do I begin when I am building lists? So one of the things I might look at is what the mission or missions that I'm building the list for. So this could be, is there an event that I'm building lists for? So that, are there a few missions that I know are going to come up in the event that I'm building a list or two lists for? Is there a specific mission? Locally on our game nights, usually there will be a mission combination suggested for people to play. So maybe I'm building a list for that specific combination. This matters in Warcrow less than some other games. So Infinity, as an example, I use a lot on the channel because it's what a lot of Warcrow players come from. But some game systems, the mission really defines your list. This is less of the case in Warcrow, but there are definitely some mission combinations, both scenarios, but especially feats, that lend towards certain requirements or certain things you want to be thinking about while making lists. So looking at the mission is definitely one place where starting lists can begin and looking at those requirements. The second thing, what models do you have? Unless you're playing online on TTS or something like that, and if you aren't super prone to wanting to proxy, what do you own? What models do you have assembled and ready to bring out to that game night or to that event? And what do you have painted? Painting isn't a requirement in the game, but I know I don't always, as I'm painting up armies, I know locally there's a bunch of guys that won't play their models if they're not painted. So when you're building a list, unless you're going to speed up your painting, if you're preparing for a game night or an event, what do you have? What do you have painted that you actually can choose from? Because that's going to be the biggest limiting factor. And the third thing, when I'm starting building lists, is there something I really want to bring? Sometimes there's just a particular unit or combination of units that you're like, I really want to try these. Maybe you just got a war rig and you want to put that big centerpiece on the table. Maybe you just got some new models for the holidays and you want to try them out. So these are just kind of starting points. And from there, you kind of build out your lists, and that's what we'll get into. Just delving into that whole missions thing in a bit more detail. As I was saying, certain missions have certain or specific considerations that you want to take while building your list to make it either so you can do the mission or just to make it significantly easier. And the best way to look at this is really to go through some examples. So the first, and I think biggest example, is decapitation. So in the decapitation feat, your leader of your force, so either your high command or whichever officer is designated as your commander, cannot join units, and they have to be on the table the whole time. Because of this, when you're playing decap, you want to give serious consideration to, do you have a high command or solo officer that is happy to be by themselves, can survive on their own, and is still contributing to the game being on their own. Some commanders you might be able to hide in the back, but you don't necessarily want them to just be wasting if they don't do anything when they're not attached to a unit. Good examples of this are someone like Drago, who, unattached, gives his entire faction his leadership or his willpower, as well as his still having access to his really good command ability to increase a unit's conquest. Fairly durable on its own. Good solo officer. For example, in the Scions, if you don't have a high command, someone like Lady Mael, who can be surrounded by a bunch of husks, is pretty hard to kill because she can pass those wounds off. And she can still be impacting the game because, she can never join a unit, so there's actually no change for her in terms of being prohibited from joining units. In decapitation, you also want to consider whether you have easy contract targets. In decap, beyond trying to assassinate the leader, your opponent is going to choose one of your units to try and kill. If you have a very easy to kill unit that you can't really afford to hide, maybe they're expensive, maybe they're crucial to the game plan, that can make it hard for you. Another big consideration is things like support characters. A support character in a unit that is fairly fragile is easier to kill, because let's say you have a vulnerable support in a fairly vulnerable unit. Your opponent can choose to kill the support character, in which case they don't even need to wipe the whole unit before the support character dies. So that I'd consider put less consideration on, because realistically everyone's going to have a contract that's not a weakest unit, but it's something you might want to consider when making lists if you're playing decap. Another feat that you might want to put consideration to is banners. So in banners, you're going to want to make sure that you have a unit that makes a good banner bearer. So what does that mean? It's a unit that can run without an attachment, or a character that doesn't want to be attached, because the banner bearing unit cannot have an attached character. You want them to be able to do damage, because you score points by getting your banner bearers to do damage. This can be at range, so range units can be pretty good banner bearers. And also you want a unit that's not going to die very easily or flee very quickly, because they'll drop their banner if they die or flee. So having a good banner bearer unit is very handy. Examples of this are Echoes and Scions, are a very durable unit that can hit hard, and because they're golems, they can never flee. Ranged units can also make good banner bearers. So maybe if you have the equipment to protect arquebusiers in Embersig so that they can shoot at your opponent while staying outside of range, so maybe they just don't even need to worry about fleeing. They can also be characters, as we were saying before, with Lady Mael. Lady Mael, because she has the Husk to protect her, is pretty reliable at not dying. She has decent morale and willpower, so unlikely to flee, and she can start pumping out shots with her spells to get those push up the track with the banner. Another mission worth considering is the Rift. So in the Rift, there are the two rifts that you're going to want to put a unit on that can sit there and hold it while waiting for it to close. So, you don't need to have it, but units that would be worth considering in this mission or this feat are immovable units, something like a bulwark that can't just be pushed off from losing combat without needing to stress themselves. Again, we talked about Echoes. You also want something that has a decent willpower, or can have an attachment that gets them up to a decent willpower, so that they don't need to sit there as long, because you're going to need to make that test to initially start closing the rift. You also do consideration to units that are good at pushing targets. So this can be both units that are going to win combat. Maybe you have an ability that allows you to push, like aggressors have their command token ability to push an enemy when they are fighting them, and also large units. Now that large units are able to push non-large units, even if they are immovable, something like a large unit being able to kick those bulwarks off the rift could be worth considering. And the final one I'm just going to mention is the resources. This one's probably the least important to give consideration to, but you might want to have consideration of the size of your units into resources. A unit, units outside of 12 strides, if I remember correctly off the top of my head, make a roll, not a willpower roll, based on the unit size. So a unit of one model rolls 1 yellow, 2, 2, 3 is a yellow and orange, and if you hit 4, you get to roll a yellow, orange, and a red. Because of this, making sure that you have a number of units that are larger, 2, 3 at least, but definitely having 4 plus models can really make it so those rolls are more effective. So your return on stressing units, because you need stress to make the roll, to moving up the track is higher. So I know something to consider when doing the missions. I'll say this time and again, there's no hard and fast rules when it comes to list selection, but these are things you might want to think about. And some checks you might want to do at the end. Do I have things that can do the missions? Another thing that we're going to look at when building lists is synergies. So I'm just going to look for them for those that might not be aware. So a synergy is essentially two or more units that have abilities that, on their own might be not very good or might just be okay, but when together and when working together, they elevate each other further. So if you think of it, instead of 1 plus 1 or 1 plus 2 is 3, synergies is more multiplicative. So you have something that's a value of 1 and something that's value of 2. When they synergize, it might be getting you up to multiplying, get you a 6 as opposed to getting to just a 3. So we're going to be looking for synergies. Some of them are pretty obvious. For example, husks in Scions plus a puppeteer or Mael. So puppeteer and Mael at the time of recording are the 2 virtuoso units, and gives them an ability to allow you to respawn husks. So this is a clear, I'd say, synergy, right? Husks are pretty good, but they're fairly weak and will die. Husk plus a puppeteer, now you have this unit that can die and keep coming back, right? So on top of that, the puppeteers in Mael specifically mention the husks in their abilities, both to boost risen units, which the husks are, as well as specifically mention the husks in terms of the ability to pass wounds off onto them. So together, husks on their own are okay, puppeteer and Mael on their own are okay, but together they're actually very strong and make this very good package. Other, obvious synergies is an evoker plus a rock troll. Again, we have the rock troll card specifically giving evokers an additional spell to revive the rock troll and move them around, as well as an ability for both units to stress at the end of activations to have the other evoker stressing to have the rock troll, or rock troll stressing to have the evoker do an action. So these are what I consider obvious synergies, where these 2 plus units start working together to make all their abilities that much better. There are some synergies that I say are less obvious. So these might be units that don't specifically mention the units that they synergize with, but together can really help elevate the power. So one example I think of is Drago and Black Angels. Now, Black Angels are fast, they're not particularly hard hitting, but what they can do really well with Drago is Black Angels can scoot past your enemy because of their speed, and thanks to Drago's ability to boost their conquest at the end of their activation, quickly score objectives over opponents. Black Angels have an actual conquest of 1, jumping that up to a 3 thanks to Drago will actually take objectives from a lot of opponents, even if they do have units camped on them. So this is a pretty nice little synergy because you're compounding Drago's powerful ability to boost your conquest on units with the extreme speed of Black Angels to really play that objective game that Ember Sig likes to do. Other synergies are something like the Sprigs and the Walker of the Leaf Storm. As I talked about when reviewing the Walker of the Leaf Storm, Walker of the Leaf Storm's whole thing is about pulling themselves and another unit off the board and appearing somewhere else. Now, they need to appear near a forest or a Nemeris unit. The Sprigs are a 4-man Nemeris unit, which means they have a fairly large footprint. So bringing both the Sprigs and Walker of the Leaf Storm together, the Sprigs act as a mobile, essentially, beacon for the Walker of the Leaf Storm and whoever they're picking up to teleport back in. So, I wouldn't say these are super secret, super hidden synergies, but they're a bit less obvious than something like Volker and Rock Troll, which literally name each other in their abilities. So, these are just a few synergies. These are examples. Again, comments. I'd love to hear different synergies that people have found in their different factions, especially ones that I might play a bit less. But when you're building lists, you want to kind of look for these things. You want to look for units that work together to boost each other's powers. That, teamwork. And that, the abilities that nicely mesh together. Another thing you're going to want to think about when making your list is characters. Warcrow has good mechanics and interesting mechanics for attaching characters to units to boost them. When I'm building my lists, I see some characters and units as packages. And by that I mean these are usually characters and attachments that I'll often bring together. If I'm bringing that unit, I'm going to be bringing that character or another character with them. So for example, if you've seen my battle reports or heard some of the Architect's Forge on them, I really like Anointed and First Anointed together. They complement each other very well. They work together very well. And the power of an Anointed unit by themselves versus an Anointed with a First Anointed is, in my mind, greatly different. So if I'm bringing one, I'm pretty much always, if not always, bringing the other. Another package that I've seen a bunch is Lotta and Orc Hunters. Lotta is a very good character and really helps be a force multiplier for Orc Hunters to make them really hit pretty hard and get in the fight very far, thanks to her whip ability, where she whips them up to get in there, and also then boost the damage they do when you attack them. So this is like a package. You'll bring Orc Hunters without Lotta. I haven't seen Lotta too much without Orc Hunters, although she does fit into other units. It's a nice package that when you're building your list, you might say, I'm going to add this chunk together, as opposed to putting in Orc Hunters and later being like, okay, maybe I'll add Lotta. Other units or other characters are kind of like nice to add at the end, as I was kind of describing there, where I might fill out the units I want, and then at the end round out points by adding in some characters. So an example of this, a lot of the time when I'm building Ember Sig lists, I might say, okay, I know I want Arquebusiers in here, I want some Buckermen to holding points, and then when I get to the end of the list, I'll see that, maybe I have 20, 35 points left, and I'll say, okay, well, I'm happy with how many units I have, big, 4-man blocks, and I'll be like, okay, what characters can I add to help, boost these other units? So, I have 15 points left, maybe I'll throw a engineer into this unit of Arquebusiers, because, I already have a War Surgeon, I already have some of these other things. I have 15 points, let's buff out these Arquebusiers, give them some rerolls. Or, maybe I don't have a Corporal, we'll throw one into the Buckerman, stuff like that. So, when there's kind of those two different ways I see characters, either you're putting them in from the beginning, or sometimes it's like the rounding out those last few points. I do think, though, that when you're building lists, you really do want to prioritize units pretty much first, because characters are nice, but really units are the ones that usually have, multiple man units are the ones that actually have conquest usually. They're the bricks that actually usually win you the games and score points. The characters are usually either buffing them or, just rounding out and maybe providing a bit more damage. But you really want to start with the units themselves. So that's kind of the course I take. And then when you're building lists, there's a few things that I like to keep in mind while building lists. And this is kind of a check of what do I have enough of this? So beyond the missions, some generic things that I like to keep in mind while building lists. Total conquest. So do I actually have enough conquest on the field that I'm comfortable taking points? Now, factions will vary quite differently in terms of how much conquest I have on the board, but you really want, the bare minimum of 5. You probably want more than that in terms of conquest. If you start building lists and you find that you're very low on conquest, that doesn't mean you can't play that list, but it does mean that when you go into the game, you're really going to need to keep in mind how much conquest you have and where you're going to need to really push enemies off of points because you won't be able to just take it by having high conquest. If you do have a high conquest, maybe you're an Ember Sig player and you have a bunch of units that just are, when they sit on a point, they'll be able to score out over people. That's something that, when reviewing your list, it's good to know because that can inform how you're going to play on the table. Another thing you want to keep in mind is the number of starting activations you have. This is different than the number of units because, let's say you might have 5 units and 3 of them might have attached characters. Technically speaking, that's 8 activations, but realistically, if those attached characters aren't going to be leaving the units, or definitely not in the early rounds, you could say you have 5 activations. You really want to make sure you have enough that you aren't going to be forced to stress units to activate them a lot, because later in the rounds, then you're going to start running into issues where you're stress capped and either you can't activate units or they're only going to be able to activate to rest. So I usually like having at least 5 units that are going to be activating on their own so that I can activate a unit multiple times by stressing them, but I'm not forced to. Also, keep in mind that over the course of the game, you're probably going to lose units. So if you only start with 4 and you lose 1, now you're really going to be getting tight on that stress. Another thing you'll want to keep in mind is the ratio of command tokens to command token abilities. Now, I don't just say how many command tokens you have, because that doesn't really matter. It matters for things like getting priority, but if you only have 1 command token ability that you can only use once per round, if you have 3 command tokens, that's all you're ever going to need, right? So that wouldn't be too low. Whereas if you're playing Ember Sig and you have 5 different command token abilities that you can use multiple times, and you want to use a bunch, and you somehow only have 3 command tokens, that ratio is probably a bit low. So you want to keep in mind, am I bringing enough command tokens that I can use the command token abilities that I have frequently enough, or about as much as I want? You won't always have more enough to do it as often as you want. Sometimes you will, sometimes you won't, but you want to make sure that it's not wildly out of sync. If you have 7 good command token abilities and you only have 3 command tokens, you probably want to think about whether you can sneak in a few more command tokens. Overall, the game's pretty good at making it so you don't need to think about this, where units that have command token abilities often bring 1 or 2 command tokens, but there are cases where you get these abilities without command tokens, and you're going to need to keep it in mind. Again, it's not a cut and dry, I can't run it that way. It's just something you want to be aware of when you've built your list so that you know what you need to do on the battlefield. You want to know, I can't just willy-nilly be using this command token ability. I need to save my limited command tokens for the better ability, possibly. So, again, just something to think about. And the final big thing to keep in mind is what the join keywords you have on your characters are, and whether you actually have a unit that fit into. Nothing's worse than showing up to the table thinking, okay, cool, I don't want this character on their own, but it's fine, I'm going to put them in this unit. And then you go to do it and your opponent points out, oh no, they have a more limited join. So maybe, you're planning, you have Drago, you're like, I'm just going to put him in these aggressors. I have this whole, everyone has their spot. I want Drago in these aggressors. And your opponent points out, oh no, Drago can only join bulwarks or bucklermen. So just be mindful if you're bringing characters with the plan to attach them, make sure you actually have a unit they can join. So now that we've gone through now that we've gone through the thought process I have and the process of building a list, things you want to keep in mind, I'm going to walk you through 3 example lists that I've made. I'm going to walk you through kind of the thought process I used and the course I took to making them, so you can see the different approaches. Each of these 3 lists, different factions, there's a Scion one, a Feudom one, and a Syennan one, come from a different, approach to building the lists. And as I've said, there's no right way. These are all valid ways to build lists and all different ways you can think of when building lists. So, jumping in with the Scions first. So, when I was building this list, I was building it with no specific mission in mind. Think of it as more of an all-comers list, kind of can do every mission fairly well. This is particularly good if you're doing a event. Let's say you're doing a tournament, or for example, the Warcrow World League, where every mission is possibly in play. It's a one list format, so you need kind of a list that can kind of do everything. So starting this list, I'm getting some husks. I'm excited to try the husks, so I wanted to try them, and I start by throwing in what I consider the basic husk package, starting with 3 husks. I start with 3 with the keeping in mind that if I need 10 points later, I'm happy to reduce to 2, because 2 versus 3 husks, it's not a huge difference. Both are valid. And then, the rest of the package, I'm throwing in a puppeteer and Master Mael. You don't need both for the package, but because I'm building this list with the idea of I want to really be showcasing or trying out the husks, I want to be bringing the full thing. I want to bring both the 2 characters that really synergize well with them. Now, I could throw in Samara. I'm not going to throw in Samara just for points, and I want to have some other stuff, but we'll get to. So, after I've thrown in this package, it's a fairly cheap package, only 85 points, bringing 3 units of 4-man units, 2 characters that are wandering on by their own. This is actually just 5 activations right there, right? It's pretty unique to the Scions, but that's just 5. So I want to add some other stuff. Again, I'm leaning into the husks, so I decided to add a breath. This is, not as obvious as the synergies, but the breath throws out tinge. The casters like having extra tinge to augment their spells. The husks like extra tinge to, use in exchange of wounds. Throwing in a breath, fairly cheap investment, brings me to that nice round 100 points. So, right now I have a bunch of bodies. I have some decent hitting power with Master Mael. I have some good control with Puppeteer moving around the husks. But I don't really have anything particularly durable. Or anything really that hits that hard in melee. So, what do? I decide I want to add some beef, some offense as well. Personally, if you've seen my videos, I like the Anointed and the First Anointed. So, I throw in an Anointed, First Anointed. Fairly reasonably costed, 60 points. Just chuck them in. There is some additional synergy here. Master Mael and the Puppeteer are both officers, and the Anointed have that nice ability to teleport around after officers. So, I'm going to fairly often be able to get that extra bit of movement for the Anointed. It costs them stress. First Anointed gives them additional 2 stress, meaning 2 morale, meaning they can, take up to 4 stress. It makes it so the Anointed with these guys are going to be pretty mobile. So we've done that. I like some additional strength. I talk about them in a lot of videos, so I'll throw in a unit of Echoes. This is a strong unit. They don't need an attachment. They can hit pretty hard. They can do a lot of the feats if they come up fairly reliably on their own. They're good banner bearers, as we said. They can't demoralize and flee. They hit pretty hard. They're pretty durable. They're good at the rift. They're removable if they take the defensive stance. So, good solid unit. Throw them in. The next thing I chose to add was a unit of Gobblers. One, I just like red caps. I find their models funny and adorable. And the Gobblers are a nice scouting unit. They're fairly durable. I don't need to worry about them demoralizing and fleeing because they are immune to demoralizing. And I can kind of just have them floating around on the sides, pressuring the enemy, giving them something to think about. Now, at this point, I have 20 points left in the list. And with that, I decide to add in a needle. And I'm going to put that needle into the Gobbler unit. This makes the Gobblers even tougher. It gets them up to, I believe it's a green, 2 blue, 2 black for defense, plus tiny, making you reroll an opponent's die. Gets them up to 4 wounds each. The needle can help revive them. It just makes them that much more annoying. he does also boost their conquest, and the gobblers scouting into the side are also floating around with 2 conquests to pressure the opponent. So this is the sample list. You have a mix of a lot of large bodied units with those husks that kind of just floating around. They're 1 conquest each. If the puppeteer's nearby, they're 2 conquest each. Supported by 2 beefier 2 model, 3 with the first anointed in them units with the anointed and the echoes, and you have the gobblers as this kind of scouting unit on the flanks. Again, can do some feats pretty well, like track. Pretty decent resources too, because with the needle, they're 4 models, things like that. So we've built a list. We're going to do that rundown, that review that I talked about. So let's see, what do we have in the number of bodies. In general, you don't need a lot of bodies, but I like having a decent number of bodies on the field, both for blocking people getting to objectives, doing missions like we were talking about, and just taking up space. Your opponent can't just go through you. One of the things great about husks is they're kind of a roadblock. Your opponent doesn't want to waste time dealing with them, but they can, you spread them as much as you can, and they kind of just roadblock people. So how many bodies do we have? There's 24 bodies in this list. We have ways of bringing husks back with the puppeteer and Mael. We can bring back our 3 beefier units with the needle if the needle is nearby. So it's a pretty big chunk of models. So yeah, it's good. It's definitely a healthy number of bodies. You don't need to get near that much with other factions. The husks kind of make it easy to get up there, even despite having 2 2-man units and a 3-man unit. Conquest. Counting the characters that are attached, adding to their units, there's 9 conquest in this list, which is pretty good. I think it's decent enough. This is not counting the bonus conquest from the puppeteer. So if the puppeteer is near the husks, it actually goes up to 12. Yeah, it goes up to 12. So that's a decent, that's actually quite high in terms of conquest. If you can either push it into one spot or just really hit those points that your opponent's on while moving up your walls, you can take points. Activations. There are 9 activations in this list, which is pretty much as high as I've ever gotten to or ever seen. There's also methods of multiple activations with the puppeteer and Mael being able to force the husks to do an action or to do a full activation at the end of the puppeteer or Mael's activation. So you've got enough units to activate. You're going to have a lot of no one left behind. Even as units die, you're not going to worry about being forced to activate units again and stress them. So, and finally, the command token to command token ability ratio. This list has 6 command tokens and only 2 command token abilities. It has the command token ability given from the husks to puppeteer and Mael to spend a command token and a tinge to respawn a husk. And you have the Anointed's ability to spend a stress and a command token to set a dice while defending. Neither of these abilities you're going to use all the time. The Anointed one you probably won't even use that often because the stress cost of it can be quite high on them. And you're not going to need to use the other one if the husks haven't died. And if they have died, you can bring them back, but again, Master Mael and the puppeteer will also need to have tinge on them, and they might have spent all their tinge. So 6 command tokens, I'd say, is plenty for those 2 abilities. I wouldn't be too worried about it. If anything, I'd expect this list would often have command tokens left at the end of the game. So, final thoughts on this list. With any list, you can always do tinkering. This isn't a perfect list. Simple changes for this list, for example, you could drop the breath and a husk and exchange it for a tutor, which is a very powerful character that you can attach to a unit. In this case, maybe I drop a husk and the breath and put a tutor into the echoes outside of things like banners where they need to be separate. This would make the echoes really scary, get their conquest up to 4. So it's definitely something I'd consider. You will lose out on having as much tinge, and, taking experimenting, maybe you feel you need that tinge more. So what does this list have? You have durable, hard-hitting units in the Anointed and the Echoes. You got a bunch of roadblocks in the Husk Swarm with the 3 units of Husks. You have casters, which is always nice to have. So you have Mael, Puppeteer, and the Breath, all of which can try and counter block your opponent's spells. One nice thing for the Scions, usually there's a trade-off. When you try and block a spell, you might gain tinge, but Scions like getting tinge. So you really, in this case, will choose whichever caster you want to try and get more tinge. So nice to have. You have a good backline threat. By this I mean a unit to threaten the enemy backline. This is the Gobblers. They don't hit particularly hard, but they're annoying. Your opponent probably doesn't really want to deal with them, but they also can't just ignore them. It does force your opponent to leave something back to, let's say they have a back point being threatened by Gobblers. Your opponent's now not going to be able to walk that unit away. If that unit doesn't have, a lot of conquest, the Gobblers might threaten to push them off the objective and take it. So it's just something to be there and annoy them. What does it lack? It lacks what I'd consider an assassin piece. So for something like Decap, if you really need to go after a unit hiding in the back, you don't really have a good unit for that. The Gobblers are back there because they have the Scout, but as I said, they don't really hit hard. In melee, they're like an orange and 3 yellows. Their shot is only a red and orange and a hit. They can do chip damage, but they're not particularly nasty. You also have a bit of a positioning. It's not a problem, but it's a complication. The Husks are really buffed by having the Puppeteer and Mael nearby. So you kind of want them to be together. It's going to help restrict where they can be. If you have that whole clump together, well, now that whole clump is in one place, and you're spread thin elsewhere on the board. If you start breaking up that clump, having 2 with Mael and 1 with the Puppeteer, or 2 with the Puppeteer, 1 with Mael, now the synergies aren't compounding on each other as much. So it's not a big negative, but it's something you need to be taking into consideration. You also might have the Anointed jumping around following Mael or the Puppeteer, which means now you might have a lot of guys in one place stepping on each other's toes. So it's something that you need to be aware of. Again, a lot of things with lists, there's no perfect list. It's about being aware of the strengths and limitations or things that you need to think about while fielding the list. So that's Scions. Let's go into a Feudom list. So I approached going into the Feudom list a bit differently. Feudom has, in my mind, 3 high commands with very distinct builds. So I wanted to start and be like, hey, I'm going to build a list for one of the 3 high commands. In this case, I looked through them, and I'm like, I'm going to choose to build with the Magister. So Magister has two, I think, abilities on his card that kind of dictate how you probably want to build for him. The first is Follow Suit, which allows a non-noble or non-knight unit to, after the activation of a noble or knight unit, essentially copy one of the actions they took. So if you have a noble or knight unit charge, after they're done, you can have a non-noble or knight unit charge. So that as well, the Master has an ability where, when non-noble or knight units deploy, you gain a command token. So because of this, the Magister on his card kind of leans towards the idea that you want a mix. You want noble and knight units, and you want non-noble knight units. This is different than, for example, Genevieve, who really wants a bunch of knight units because she specifically buffs knight units. So let's start building a use for the Magister. Obviously, he's the first unit we bring. So I like putting commanders and units like him. He also brings a lot to his units. So we're going to put him into a unit. So he can join any unit, but he does make his unit noble, which means if I put him in a non-knight or noble unit, now that's one less unit that's going to be able to do the follow suit. So I probably want to put him into a unit that is already a knight or a noble. So that leaves 2 units. The Foot Knights, who are both knight and noble, and the mace escorts. Now, there is advantage to having more noble units on the field. We'll talk about it in a moment. But the line infantry for Feudom, the Guisarmiers, get extra conquest near nobles. So I don't want to waste that nice bonus from the Magister making a unit a noble. So I decide to put him into the mace escorts. This increases the number of noble units on the field, because now the mace escorts are also noble. The mace escorts are a good unit, and he does have some good synergies with what he gives them, so I'm happy with that. Next, as I said, we want noble and non-noble, so let's add some non-noble or knight units. There's two options for that. There's the Guisarmier, and there are the Guardians of the Mound. I'm just going to add one of each. Guisarmiers are very good basic line infantry, very good at holding points, and the Guardians of the Mound are a good scout unit that also helps prevent enemy scouts and ambushers of deploying super close. So they're nice to have. And they have a little bit of range, so they're kind of cool. Also, the model's cool, so why not? Let's add them in. So now we have one noble / knight unit, two non-noble units. We kind of want to have that balance. We already have our one unit of mace escorts, so let's add in that other noble / knight unit that's currently out, the foot knights. Cool. We have foot knights. Adding another noble unit helps those Guisarmiers have a higher chance of being boosted. Gives us a nice, durable, hard-hitting unit, and we have that balance. So now if the mace escorts do something, or the foot knights do something, I can have the Guisarmiers or the Guardians of the Mound do the same thing. This can be just a move. It can be a charge. Again, getting into that Magister synergy. At this point, we have 90 points left. And I feel like I want to start looking at some characters. We have 4 units. Let's start getting into some characters. First one I see is Morgaine. Looking through the different characters, Morgaine has a very strong ability strong spell to turn off the abilities of an opponent, as well as making so they can't control objectives, which is a very strong ability. Now, she's not the most durable. I want her to be able to survive to get to use her spell, so I want to put her in a unit. I choose the Guardians of the Mound. Now, part of this is because I've seen someone do this, but I also like the idea that, this is a powerful spell I want to get up and onto an opponent early on. Why not have her scout in with the Guardians of the Mound, and then if she wants, she can leave the unit, cast her spell, and then maybe, sneak away to live to fight another day. So I'm going to add her in there. Looking at this, I'm starting to notice, okay, I have 4 units, and some attached characters. I maybe want another activation, so I'm just going to add another Guisarmier. 20 points is a very low investment for a unit that really is good at holding points. I don't need to be running them up. They can kind of just sit and do what they want. If I have one of those noble units here, they're 3 conquest at full strength, which is more than most units in the game by far. So I have a few points left. In deciding the Guisarmiers, there was also the question, do I bring them? Do I bring another unit of foot knights? Part of the decision was also that extra 15 points made a difference in terms of what I had left. So the Guisarmiers leave me with 45 points, which can break down nicely into 2 more characters to attach to units. The foot knights, that extra 15 points would leave me with 30 points, which doesn't work as well with the current units, math-wise, to add another character. So, another thing to think of, sometimes when you're getting to that tail end, you need to see, what do these points mean? What does that last 65 points get me if I go one way or the other? Going to Guisarmiers gives me 45 points, which amounts to a Syzygian, which I put in the foot knights, and a commander. Both these characters are good buffs to both units. They both boost the power of the units they're in, as well as in the case of the commander, helping with the scenario game, helping prevent opponents from stealing your objectives. Nice additions in both cases. So this is the list I came up with. We have 5 units. We have characters in 4 of 5 units. a lot of the characters are happy to leave those units and do their own thing. We have a bunch of, synergies. So, like we did before, we're just going to review the list. Some of those basic things I talked about. Number of bodies. This list still has 22 bodies. It has 4 4-man units and a 2-man unit, and then a bunch of characters. Definitely healthy enough bodies to be on the field and take up space. Conquest. Conquest of this list is 11, which is quite high. And then, if you are near nobles with the Guidebook, we're getting up to 13. That's a lot of conquest. Definitely really good for holding points. If you think about, a lot of missions have 4 or 5 points. You can put 2+ conquest on each point, which is usually more than enough. Activations. Now, so this only has 5 units that are activating on their own at the beginning, which is enough that you can just activate each of them once in a round, which is fine. There's definitely characters that will have to leave units. And then you also have a lot of out-of-activation actions, which is very nice. And not even activations. So we have, as I was talking about, the Magister's ability to have a non-noble or knight unit copy the action of a noble or knight unit. This can be used for helping move guys up the field, get extra charges. You also have things like the mace escorts, who just if an opponent ends close enough to them, they can spend a command token to charge. So you have a lot of ways to get more actions out during the game and not worry too much about not having units to activate. It's also nice to point out those extra actions that we've been talking about in this list are all not activating unit, which means you can't do something different. It's not a full activation, but it also means you aren't needing to worry about using that unit's activation, getting the activation token, or stressing to do it. So, definitely a action-heavy list. So good. Now, the command token to command token ability ratio here is a bit tricky. It's definitely tighter. So, you start with 4 command tokens, but the Magister's ability does mean that when you deploy the Guidebook and the Guardians of the Mound, you get a command token. So this effectively means you have 7 command tokens. You might not start with 7 if the Guardians of the Mound decide to scout not after deployment. You probably will usually just to save the action. So you're probably looking at 7. Now, you do have 6 command token abilities. Some of these are very powerful abilities, like the Follow Me ability to have a unit, for example, charge. So let's say you have Foot Knight's charge unit. You can use Follow Me to have Guisarms across from the other side of the field charge unit as well. That's a very powerful ability. Like the Mace Escort's ability to charge a unit that ends near them. Other abilities are strong, like setting dice with the Foot Knights, but aren't as powerful. So you are going to need to pick and choose where you're spending those command tokens. You have a healthy amount with 7, but you can easily blow through them in this list. So you're going to need to be mindful of when and where you're spending those tokens. Some final thoughts on this list. What does it have? Well, it definitely has durable, hard-hitting units. In the Knights, as well as even the Guisarms are fairly hard, can hit pretty well, and they're definitely durable and put out a lot of, they put out disarm quite a bit. You have quite a bit of conquest, both with and without accounting for the noble bonus on the Guisarms. You can definitely push and take points. And because that Follow Me ability, you can have the Guisarms following up your knight units up the field, so it's not a question of pushing one or the other. You also have quite a few methods of extra actions. This game is fairly limited in terms of activations. You get 5 activations around outside of, special activation tricks, which usually means you're getting, effectively 30 actions. Anything that boosts that is good. It also helps counter some of the slower movement that Feudom has, so the extra actions are definitely welcome in this list. What do we lack? Well, it is minimal activations, right? I said 4 to 5 is your minimum. This has 5, not accounting for someone like Morgaine leaving a unit. It's just something to be aware of. it does mean that you're likely either going to be activating a unit that's not doing as much, or you're going to be stressing a unit to activate again. You have decent morale on the units you want to activate multiple times, so it's not the end of the world, but it's definitely something you want to be considerate of. The other thing is that the units are relatively slow. When you run out of command tokens to get those extra actions, the list can feel slower than some other lists. So again, just be aware of and be careful when you're moving. Make sure that you're using those command tokens well and smart to try and push towards winning the game, right? Sometimes it might be nice to use a command token to set a die to hit a bit harder, but if hitting that unit a bit harder isn't really forwarding you winning the game as much as, say, moving another unit up onto a point, you definitely want to lean towards the moving onto another point. Okay. One last list. It's a Syennan list. Now, this one's a bit different. This is what I consider a meme list. When I say meme list, it's kind of like I choose a gimmick. Maybe there's a gimmick that a list can do, and then you just push it to the extreme. In this case, the gimmick was actually first, I didn't think of it. It was mentioned by the Touch of Tinge guys, which is what if you just didn't deploy anything on the field during deployment and essentially just pass deployment? We don't quite do that, but we're essentially doing that. So if I'm going to do a gimmick like that, you filter. In this case, I filtered for Ambusher, just added them, just all 5. And there are some other ambushers that didn't add Verkana. And I think there's one other ambusher I didn't add just because I didn't want. Oh, one of the birdmen didn't work with the list as much, so I didn't add them. So we have Aileen running around by herself ambushing. She's the cool character, cool portal elf that jumps around on her own, blasting people, but also adding. She gets to place a unit at the end, so adding more movement. Shadow the Ruin jumps out, shoots people, has traps, fun. Walker the Leaf Storm. This is the portalier of the portal elves. She's the one that we'll talk about that portals other elves, so you ambush, and then later in the game you're going to keep ambushing with spells. Leo Slaith, very powerful leader, happens to ambush, but I'm just going to add her into the Shadows of the U. She works out well with the Shadows of the U. She also helps add to the durability of your list. A lot of Syennan are not very durable. Ambushers also, in general, are not very durable. She adds durability as long as you're near those Forest or Nemoris units. So, very strong, and of course, anyone that knows Syennan, Shadows of the U are just a very powerful unit, and their ambushers, they fit the gimmick, they're in. We've gone through our ambushers. Let's add scouts. They also don't deploy in normal deployment, so let's add them. Clouded, new cav unit, very fast. Scout, very good. They're also Nemoris, which helps with the Portal Witch. Walker of the Leaf Storm. We'll call it Walker of the Leaf Storm. So she can teleport units that have already deployed. 10 near the Clouded. That's fun. We have the Grove Curtailers with Nikale in them. They're pretty good. Nikale only can join Curtailers. He boosts their abilities a bit. He can help keep them a bit healthier. Pretty good with that. And the other nice thing is with these units being the ones we add, the points work out perfectly that we can just add a Druid. Now, the Druid is not an ambusher, and he's not scout. He does have to deploy at the beginning. But it's kind of funny just deploying just a Druid, and also he adds good synergy by bringing out that forest, which just expands where these guys can teleport into. Either one, if you don't have line of sight, ambushers can just end beside you in a forest, but also with that Leo Slaith boosts, getting them more durable with the forest, and also the Walker of the Leaf Storm. So, again, it's a gimmick list. Is it the most powerful list? Is it maybe going too far into the ambushing and scout? Maybe. But it should be silly and fun, and you can kind of see, you lean into it all the way, and then you can tune back in later lists after you see where it's gone too far. Quickly reviewing this list. Number of bodies were a lot lower than the other list. There's only 14 bodies on the field. But this is to be expected when you're bringing more elite and ambushing units. Conquest is also quite low. This is generally a Syennan issue, but ambushers, and there's a lot of units in the list that have 0 conquest, so you're definitely going to need to be punching and being careful. Now, the nice thing is, because you're appearing wherever you want, you can just appear where your opponent has low conquest and push people off points and kill them. So, You just need to be definitely aware of that. You have a good number of activations. There are 7, plus you get out of activation actions and bonus activations thanks to things like the Warcrow Lindwurm. So it's a good amount. Command token to command token ability here. Syennan, as is often the case, only have 4 command tokens. It's low. There are 2 very strong command token abilities. The traps on the Shadow of the Rowan and the ability of the Warcrow Lindwurm to have a unit activate at when they teleport in at the end of the round. So you're definitely need to be choosing and balancing between the 2. Now, one of those abilities, the extra activation, is once per round. So max 3 of those command tokens can be used on it. So if you think of it as I'm going to be using that once per round because it's a very strong ability, that leaves you with 1 command token on the Shadow of the Ruin to do the traps. If, for example, the Warcrow Lindwurm dies before it can do it 3 times, hey, now you get an extra command token for a trap. An additional thing we're going to consider for the Scion here is the Nemoris, how many units you have that you can have guys spawning off of, as well as extending that damage reduction from Leoslave. And here we have 4, plus the automatic tree from the Druid. So in this case, the Clouded are Nemoris. The Aileen is Nemoris. She's not a big footprint for the range, but she's jumping around with people. The Walker of the Leaf Storm is Nemoris, which doesn't matter for her teleporting her unit in, but it does matter for when she brings a unit in with her. Well, they'll be near a tree because they have to be, but also you can expend it a bit with her, and of course the Druid. So you have a decent amount. You have a tree automatically. You can probably, with good positioning, be getting the Nemoris buffs when you need them. Final thoughts. The list has a gimmick down. We definitely nailed the let's ambush as much as we can. Because that, it's very hard to predict where the units will be, and it's a very mobile unit list that can both be fast based on the units themselves, but can also reposition quickly with things like the Walker the Leaf-Storm teleporting your units, as well as Aileen. It can also hit pretty hard. A lot of the units in this list do hit and can do a lot of damage, so you can really be using that guerrilla style of appearing, hitting something hard, and running away. What does it lack? It lacks traditional durability. You don't really have an anvil unit, something to really just sit in combat and grind. It's very much, the durability is more in terms of not being there when your opponent tries to hit back, as well as a bit of extra durability from Leoslave, giving you that damage reduction or negation. It also lacks conquest. It is very low on conquest, so you need to be mindful of, taking objectives, getting your opponents away from them, and then teleporting off, going to somewhere else where your opponent isn't, or where you can push them away and not need to deal with their higher conquest. So that's been the video on the how I do lists. Some quick final thoughts. There's no hard and fast rules. Just, this has all just been considerations for how you might want to try and list build or different things. But really, when it comes down to it, play what you want. When in doubt, the rule of cool, just play what you like the look of. You'll find what works for you. Just try something, and if it doesn't work, try something else. There's 0 stakes for trying something and finding out it doesn't work. But, if possible, try and do those tests before going to a tournament, especially a big one. It can be a bit demoralizing to try a gimmick or something for the first time and finding it just doesn't work at the beginning of a 5-round event. Sometimes it can just be fun to do what we did with the Syennan, and just do a meme list, just see how far you can push the gimmick. There is probably a point where too much of a good thing is too much. Just lean into it fully, see where that point is, and then just start pulling back and building a more balanced list. And just, as we said before, some things to quickly double check in your lists: number of activations, getting that, ideally 5, minimum 4. Make sure your keywords, the join keywords in particular, align with how you plan to attach characters. Make sure that you aren't, drastically less command tokens than you want based on the command token abilities that you have. And make sure you have at least enough conquest to play the objectives. With that, this has been the first of the Traveler's Guide to Lindwurm on list building. I hope it has been helpful. Please let me know what you think. Let me know if this has been helpful. Let me know if you have different ways that you build lists. Let me know if there's any synergies that you particularly like or different things that you would do differently in terms of list building. And just do that in the comments below. And remember to like and subscribe. And with that, may the dice always be in your favor.